Good morning, good afternoon, depending on where you're joining us from. We are glad to have you here today on this webinar as we discuss about creating jobs through off-grid electrification in Ethiopia. My name is Esther Kahinga, the facilitator for this webinar today. However, I'm joined by a few other of our colleagues from the organizations that we've been working with on this piece of work. I'll quickly start by asking our team leader, Pauline, to start by giving us the welcoming remarks. Thank you. And I'll kindly request that we participants keep our videos and our mics off. And we'll only have the speakers with their videos on so that we can be able to relate to the people we are speaking to. So thank you and welcome, Pauline.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Good morning, good afternoon from wherever you're joining us. We're so glad that you're able to join us this afternoon in East Africa for this very exciting webinar on the potential of job creation, using standalone solar. We're very pleased that this is our first event that is really a joint effort with the Jobs Creation Commission and EMA in Ethiopia, and this sort of collaboration with the work that we have done has been a very good collaboration on our part, and we've been able to demonstrate that standalone solar is a technology that can be used widely, and more so in creating income for nations and countries. We're especially pleased that in looking at this from a jobs creation perspective, we're able to identify various value chains that can actually use standalone solar to create new jobs, especially for women and youth in rural areas where they do not have electrification. So it is with this, I'm really pleased to just pass this across to the Jobs Creation Commission for the opening remarks, and look forward to a meaningful discussion as we look at different topics in our breakout sessions, including discussions on improving access to finance, easing supply chain restrictions, and bridging information and skills gaps. So I want to thank you sincerely, and also want to thank the Jobs Creation Commission and EMA for really this collaborative work that we have done, and in this collaboration being able to demonstrate the need for various partners to work together in order to achieve various goals in our countries. So with those few remarks, I want to pass this across to Bezawak from the Jobs Creation Commission for the opening remarks. Thank you very much.
Can all of you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Yes. Good morning and good afternoon, everyone. You are welcome to this webinar. As JCC, we are a coordinating organ that coordinate over all the job agendas in the country. So we have to have a different discussion session. This is our fourth discussion session regarding job-related agendas. One of our priority sector was plan of action that would be implemented, starting to implement before 1 year ago, and it extends for 5 years after this, and then it have almost 8 pillars. Among those 8 pillars, we make a sectoral diagnosis. This sectoral diagnosis also have a great impact to create 3 million jobs per year. So energy is one of those the bottlenecks that we have to have addressed as a government to create jobs. So we have to have a little bit of discussion with energy, and then all of you, maybe we can address later on after this discussion. The webinar is almost, we are starting officially. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Ato Bezawork. Maybe I'll start by introducing myself. My name is Adam Fenta. I'm the staff country manager here in Ethiopia. We've been implementing the staff program here for the last 2 years, and we've been working on a number of projects related to quality assurance, physical incentives, coordination, knowledge management, and access to finance. As mentioned earlier, today we're here to share the key findings from a study done by the Ethiopian Job Creation Commission titled Creating Modern Jobs Through Off-Grid Energy Access. JCC commissioned A-Staff and EMA to conduct the study, and it has taken about 6 months to implement the project. The final report has been published, and you can find it on A-Staff, EMA, and JCC website. Just to share a brief background about the study tries to explore the untapped job creation potential of MSMEs through adoption of productive use solutions. As you know, MSMEs are the second largest employers in Ethiopia, creating 880,000 jobs just between 2018 and 19. However, this report has focused on the off-grid areas where MSMEs struggle to have access to reliable grid or off-grid solutions. So this report tries to see if we provide access to productive use solutions to MSMEs, there is a high potential to increase their productivity, income, sales, and it will also create more jobs. So this report tried to see 3 key value chains with a potential for growth and job creation, and these are horticulture, wheat, and milk. And with this value chain analysis, the study showed that 190,000 new jobs can be created if we are able to provide quality and affordable off-grid productive use solutions to MSMEs in rural communities. And the study also showed that their productivity can increase by 300% for horticulture and wheat, and for milk, it's about 30%. So with that, I would like to hand over to OCA to share with us detailed findings of the study and key recommendations from the report. So over to you, Joe. Thanks.
Thank you, Eden, and let me just share my screen. Esther, just to call out that I'm unable to share my screen. I think I was meant to as I present, but perhaps maybe while that is sorted out, I'm happy to do a quick introduction. Hi, everyone. My name is Joe Chirunji. I'm an associate with Open Capital, which is a management consulting and financial advisory firm focused on supporting small and growing businesses across Africa. A couple of colleagues and I from OCA were supporting the A-Staff and EMA teams with this assessment of job creation potential via off-grid productive use of energy technologies in Ethiopia, commissioned by the JCC, as earlier said. Our team worked on this between about February and May of this year, so we're really excited to be having this follow-on discussion to push the recommendations forward. I also previously supported the same EMA team on an ACE report that looked at the state of investment into standalone solar, or SAS, to date, which I believe is also available on the ACE website and has a lot of additional contextual information about the off-grid energy sector in Ethiopia. I'm happy to sort of pivot at this point into the presentation, and I see that I have been given presenting rights. Thank you. So let me Esther, is that presenting for you?
Not yet. I can see it's sort of loading.
Okay.
But I can't see the slides yet. Yeah.
Is it showing now?
Jo, it's
Not
showing
yet.
on our end.
Yeah. There. Okay.
Great. So I think I can dive right in into sort of the key findings in this report. So as part of this work, you know, we looked at we started off just looking at the state of the workforce in Ethiopia and sort of the employment needs and gaps that exist. And then in relation to that, looked at the productive use landscape and how PUE technologies can be positioned specifically with MSMEs to create jobs. Following this, we sort of now dived into specific case studies in the, as Eden mentioned earlier, the horticulture, wheat, and milk cooling value chains to assess the potential for uptake within those specific value chains, the potential for PUE technologies to mechanize and improve those tasks, and an analysis of specific job numbers that can be created. And then the report sort of wraps up with an analysis of the existing barriers to the uptake of these technologies on the supply and demand side, and the recommendations to address those gaps. And we can maybe speak specifically about what the supply and demand dynamic means when we get to that section. So starting off with just the state of the workforce in Ethiopia, we sort of looked at this at a macroeconomic level, looking at the key macroeconomic sectors, those being agriculture, industry, and services, and saw that agriculture makes up the overwhelming majority of the workforce, and we also profiled each of these sectors, sort of looking at what are the key challenges that are being faced and how do those translate into opportunities for productive use technology. So, for example, in agriculture, looking at the sort of lack of mechanization for smallholder farmers and how PUE technologies can bridge that gap. So, you know, across these macroeconomic sectors, we sort of pulled out these statistics about how big is this workforce, how is it split across those key sectors, what is the unemployment rate, both at the general level and then also focusing on the youth, which, as you can see, is a bit higher. And then there were also some gender disparities that came out, showing that there was women were twice as likely to be unemployed as men. And so, you know, thinking about, okay, how can these gaps be bridged? The analysis focused on MSMEs, or micro, small, and medium-sized enterprises, which are well positioned to absorb a lot of the unemployed workforce, being the sort of second largest employer in Ethiopia, and in between 2018 and 2019 alone, creating or close to 1 million jobs, as well as, you know, other considerations and factors to take into account as to how MSMEs benefit the local economy, providing income generating activities, diversifying the economic base, being a key channel through which goods and services are delivered. So, you know, following that sort of state of the market, state of the workforce assessment, we then looked at, okay, what is does the landscape of PUE look like, to sort of tie the two together. So looked briefly at what the off-grid energy access gap is right now. I think a lot of you might be familiar with these numbers. About 44% of the population having access, leaving, you know, about 56% not having access. and the access gap manifesting in very specific ways for MSMEs, such as in terms of connection costs, in terms of power outages, all of which means that MSMEs are for the most part, especially off-grid MSMEs, relying on insufficient and costly fossil fuel energy. And so, looking at that and then zeroing in again to the PUE technology landscape specifically, we found that in comparison to standalone solar systems like that are primarily used for lighting and charging and basically powering households, PUE technologies, the uptake of them was still quite low. Just over 2,000 devices sold from 2019 to 2020. So not the kind of uptake that we have seen with SAS products, which have been, upwards of, I think, 1.4 million as of 2019. And we do see a lot of benefits for what PUE can do for MSMEs in terms of automating those business activities, which again were profiled in the upfront section in the report for the 3 macroeconomic sectors. Driving higher outputs, which leads to increased incomes, and then generating that labor demand to support the increased scale of activity within MSMEs, hence the job creation. So that's how all of these things tie together. I just wanted to run through sort of how that framing was done in the report. This is really just a sort of portfolio of PUE technologies that we looked at across agriculture, industrial, and services uses, as well as some general technologies as well. We highlight some companies that are operating, but more in the uses of these can be found in the report. So I think this is a point where we can maybe spend a little bit more time before diving into the recommendations. So following that upfront framing, we wanted to select value chains that presented the highest potential for absorption and for use of these PUE technologies, with the objective of creating jobs and then increasing outputs. And so we defined high potential value chains as those sort of economic activities and looking at like end-to-end across the supply chain, which met a specific set of criteria. And those are what is sort of on the left-hand side of the table. We looked at the relevance to PUE technologies. Is there a demonstrable presence of productive use applications across the supply chain, whether in Ethiopia or in comparable markets within East Africa and beyond? Can there be an easy uptake by MSMEs? In other words, do these applications not present significant market, supply chain, or policy barriers for these businesses? Is there some economic and earning potential to looking at, is this value chain employing or projected to employ a sizable proportion of the workforce, and present opportunities to increase incomes earned? And then finally, is there opportunity for gender and social impact? In other words, does it present opportunities for women, for youth, and other sort of vulnerable and marginalized groups to be absorbed into the jobs that would be created? And so with that in mind, as we, based on the data that EMA provided, because the data collection and creation process was really driven by EMA, who had the team on the ground. We identified with EMA the 3 value chains that emerged as high potential based on these criteria, and those ended up being horticulture, wheat and milk refrigeration specifically. I think it's not necessary probably to go into what's the content and how each of these value chains met these criteria. I believe this presentation, but also the report that will be available afterwards, and detail that in more light. So following that selection. Oh, Sorry, I'm seeing something else on the screen. I'm not sure if am I still presenting? I don't know if I'm the only one seeing something else on the screen.
I think also I've seen the report, not the deck.
I might have lost control of the screen sharing. Let me try again. I think maybe someone else took over the screen. Let me go back to presenting. Is it back to the presentation?
Yes.
Yeah.
All right. Yeah, so this was the slide that I just wrapped up, just talking about how we narrowed down to the 3 value chains. So following that selection, then it was now a matter of developing an analysis approach to actually try and quantify what the job creation potential across the 3 value chains could be. And so how, we developed an analysis approach that involved first looking at the key challenges that constrain efficiency and productivity of MSME activities in the value chain. And then based on those challenges, are there PUE technologies that can be responsive to those challenges, which have been tested and validated in comparable markets? And we also considered things like the average energy load and reported production capacity. And then, taking those technologies that can respond to the challenges, can we project how production would increase at each stage of the supply chain, or supply chain just meaning sort of upstream to downstream within the value chain. And that was based on primary data that EMA collected on the ground from MSMEs in the target regions of Amhara and Oromia. And so knowing the sort of increase in production, then we could project the number of jobs created based on how many MSMEs are in the value chain, multiplied by the number of jobs created via the PUE technology, multiplied by an assumption of how many MSMEs would be able to adopt the technology. The specific breakdown is available in the report and can be sort of followed along. That's just what that formula at the top is, and how the information in the table was organized to ultimately arrive at the number of jobs that can be created, totaling to about 190,000 jobs across the 3 high potential value chains. So finally moving into the barriers and recommendations surrounding this effort. So we looked at this we looked at both the barriers and recommendations on the supply and demand side. On the supply side, looking specifically at barriers that affect PUE suppliers, so local and regional operators that are actually distributing or retailing these products. What barriers are slowing down their distribution capacity? And then on the demand side, looking at barriers that hinder MSMEs on their end, what's hindering their access to these technologies. So yes, so on the supply side, looking at restrictions on vertical integration, this is something that sort of stretches across the off-grid sector. It's not necessarily particular to PUE technologies, but even standalone on that is that end-to-end participation in the supply chain. So for an operator to operate in the market as an importer, retailer, distributor, and after sales support company is fairly restricted, and so companies have to operate within these verticals. And what that means is that it limits the application of digital infrastructure within the supply chain, such as pay-as-you-go models, which have been studied fairly extensively and have shown in comparable markets to to streamline operations and supply chain costs, to ease repayments for end users and manage mitigate various risks like the risk of default on payment. As well, on the supply side, we also looked at the limited access to information, specifically the information around end user demand. What needs do MSMEs actually have, and do PE operators have the knowledge or awareness to meet those end user tastes and preferences? We found that through the consultations and interviews that EMA conducted, operators having somewhat of a superficial understanding of those needs. And then finally, the third sort of large bucket was around access to finance. The Forex challenge in Ethiopia is sort of well known and probably not new to anyone on this call. And so that inaccess to or restricted or difficult access to hard foreign currency to support importation makes local operators supply chain operations really difficult. As well, from the local currency end, we've seen an unfavorable lending environment with high interest and collateral requirements that discourage operators from borrowing from local banks. And I think for this access bit, that the investment report goes into a lot more detail on the barriers surrounding that. On the demand side, looking at MSMEs, affordability definitely comes into play, and which speaks again to the need for some installment-based mechanisms like pay-as-you-go, as MSMEs can sometimes be unable to afford the PE technologies. Access to finance comes back again on the demand side in the form and then some other sort of culture-based restrictions that manifest locally. And then finally, access to information, similar to how PE operators sort of have limited visibility on the end user. It's the same way, sort of the other way around, with MSMEs lacking adequate information on what technology offerings are available, how they function, how they can increase productivity and outputs and incomes. And then for those that are aware, an issue that came up is lack of trust in the functionality. And I think just sort of the influx of some substandard products has also affected consumer confidence in the market, which has sort of contributed to low uptake. We also profiled a few interventions that are already existing, sort of how are market stakeholders currently addressing the gaps that we identified. And as part of this, we looked at some government interventions, some private operators and what they're doing. This is just sort of like a small snapshot of the detail that's included in the report. I think maybe no need to go into this specifically at the moment, because I would like to wrap up with the recommendations and hand back to the team. Excuse me. So finally, sort of looking at, okay, we've looked at the supply and demand barriers. What are the interventions that can respond to those? On the supply side, when we think about the finance piece, we've definitely seen the need for some blended finance mechanisms that bring together concessional and commercial capital to solve that forex gap, but also to reduce the risk of lending for operators who, in many cases, view this sector as fairly high risk. How can local banks, for example, be crowded in by DFIs and other development partners and have that first loss position, have their risk reduced, and by, for example, providing guarantees to them in lending to these operators. We've also seen credit facilities that have been successful, like the market development credit line implemented by the World Bank, funded by the World Bank, implemented by the Development Bank of Ethiopia, that was successful in the standalone solar space, and I think is actually being renewed for a second credit facility as of 2021, moving forward through the next 5 years. On the access to information the recommendations really centered around public and development partners providing capacity building opportunities through pilots and market studies to showcase the potential of PUE and increase awareness on that end user demand and preferences. And that needs to be paired with skills development as MSMEs need to have the knowledge on the functionality and use of these technologies is in order to sort of adequately uptake them and use them to increase outputs. And then finally, just thinking about, how do standards and how tax and standard policies consistently enforced. We found the gaps in, the inconsistent tax exemptions on PUE technologies require some kind of standardization in order to extend the same tax exemptions to all PUE technologies and facilitate the importation of them. To that end, ACE did develop a customs handbook that maybe Eden or someone else on the team can speak to us to whether that's available at the moment. However, the recommendations really centered around adopting globally accepted standards so that a wider portfolio of PUE technologies can come into the country. And finally, on the demand side, looking at the access piece, but from the standpoint of MSMEs, we looked into some kind of results-based financing mechanisms, maybe in the form of demand-side subsidies that are sort of benefits directly to the consumer to allow them to create more affordability of these PUE technologies, but also that public and development partners could incentivize local financial institutions through various financing mechanisms like revolving funds, and that revolving fund again is a component of the market development credit line, which had a revolving fund where repayments from local operators would go into another credit line for a group of MFIs who would then extend that to end users who wanted to purchase SAS systems. So similar mechanisms like that, credit guarantees, and other government interventions that can enable affordable and flexible consumer loans. There's that skills component that we already touched on about MSMEs operating and maintaining these technologies. And finally, looking at how to ensure sustainability once these technologies are taken up through access to spare parts and various maintenance services. As these technologies have a shelf life, or a life cycle, and there need to be mechanisms in place in order to ensure that they can be used continuously through to the end of their life cycle. That's a summary of the presentation. We also, I wanted to call out, do have a couple of case studies in the report that look at how PUE technologies have been used within these value chains in other markets like Uganda through findings from the Uganda Off-Grid Market Accelerator. So sort of offers a bit more context on the application of these technologies. I'll stop there. I think hopefully that was within the allotted time, and hand back to the presenter. Thank you.
And thank you, Jo, for that good overview of the findings from the report and the study. In our next session, we'll be breaking out into 3 breakout rooms and get highlights from the session on access to finance that was being led by Ahmedin. Eden?
Okay, thank you, Esther. So sorry for the technical difficulties. Before I invite Henok, maybe Ahmeddin can just, okay, Ahmeddin is, can give us a quick highlight on what on the session, and then we will go to the closing remark by Henok. Thank you. You are on mute, Ahmeddin.
Thank you, Eden. Thank you, Esther. I'll quickly recap what's been discussed. As highlighted earlier, access to finance is a key challenge and a key impediment to widespread adoption and use of productive use technologies in key value chains. As highlighted earlier, the report identifies horticulture, wheat, and dairy as high potential to unlock at least 200,000, close to 200,000 new jobs and enhance productivity. Access to finance was discussed on both sides, demand side and supply side. We've looked at end user financing and using PAYGO to enhance end user financing. It was discussed MOE has a significant role and should take ownership to accelerate the PAYGO adoption as a key government institution. That's also been suggested. The recent launch of Telebr by Ethio Telecom is also expected to play a positive role in advancing and scale up of PAYGO technologies in Ethiopia. That's on the end user financing, but it should not be limited to mobile payments as well. Other approaches should also be explored, including exploring MFIs and agents to scale up PAYGO. These were some of the key points discussed from end user aspect. For access to finance for PUE operators, it manifests both on hard currency to import and distribute those technologies, but also local currency financing where companies are required 165% and above in amount of the loan amount as a collateral. That's a significant sum, and the interest rate is also very high, 15% and above. So there were some suggestions both to tackle the hard currency issue. One was advancing solar manufacturing of productive use technologies, local value addition and manufacturing of productive use technologies. That was discussed. And another key point deliberated during our breakout session is getting productive use of energy on the priority list for Forex. Currently, agriculture is on agricultural equipments or are part of that priority list. However, energy is not part of that list. Over time, getting productive use technologies as a priority list for Forex allocation would fast track adoption and will enable technology companies to get quick access. Also replicating working model like the World Bank Forex credit facility that's mostly to date has been implemented on lighting that could be replicated to also finance productive use technologies. These were some of the key points discussed. I just wanted to thank on behalf of IMA all for joining this session and for the valuable input you've shared. Thank you once again, and this was the key points discussed from the access to finance session.
Okay, thanks, Ahmeddin. So as discussed, key intervention area and recommendations include access to finance, improving fiscal incentives for productive use. Recently, Ministry of Finance is also trying to provide tax exemptions for key agriculture products. So that is one. Also developing standards for productive use solutions. That was the recommendation. And the last one is, awareness creation, especially at rural area. A number of MSMEs and in consumers don't have the knowledge on different technologies. Even in one of the regional agriculture transformation centers, when we shared with them some of the productive use solutions that can be powered with solar, they were very impressed and didn't have any information. So awareness creation, having pilot projects is very critical to for scale up of productive use solutions. And thank you Ato Labiz as well for the valuable feedback. He has piloted a product solar pump here in Ethiopia, and thank you for sharing your experience. With this, now I'll hand over to Henok to give the closing remark. Thank you, everyone.
Can everyone hear me? Hello?
Yes, we can hear you. Hello, we can hear you now.
Okay, perfect. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Henok Asafa. I'm the founder and managing partner at Precise. Precise is a development advisory firm that is housing the Energy Market Accelerator and partnership with the Shell Foundation. Just to say a few salient points about the discussion this afternoon, I think we should not forget this is all about jobs. Africa is the youngest continent out there. We have the youngest people on earth. Most people are very young. It's very much the same in Ethiopia. 70% of our population is under 30 years of age. About 50% is under 15. And we have near 30 million people in schools, students attending their classes in various levels of the school system in Ethiopia. 30 million. This is, as you can imagine, more than most African countries' total populations. And creating jobs for this population is a massive task for any African country. It's no different for our country here in Africa, in Ethiopia. Additional challenges here we have an extremely rural population, much like most of sub-Saharan Africa. We have probably somewhere in the range of 80, 85 million people living in rural areas, most of whom are making their livelihoods out of smallholder-based agriculture. So when we talk about creating jobs in Ethiopia, we're talking about creating jobs in rural areas. And we're talking about creating jobs in agriculture and allied services, as well as light manufacturing. These are the activities that have the most fantastic potential to create jobs. Unfortunately, what stands in the way is access to energy. Access to energy at the moment is either unavailable, which is the most expensive kind, or available in very polluting and environmentally unfriendly ways, like the use of diesel or cutting down the trees and using charcoal. All of these are actually causing the long-term degradation and hence ensuring the poverty of this country. So it's critical to make sure that affordable renewable energy is available for most of the population in our country, especially in the rural areas. Imagine farmers who live next to an all year round flowing river. Imagine farmers whose land contains groundwater under it, who could produce 3 times a year instead, while they're producing 1 time a year right now. We saw that in the study in the horticulture sector, where literally tens of thousands of jobs are potentially can be created by just availing these systems. Think of all the opportunities for doing some basic manufacturing or milling operations. Basic things, services like barber shops, beauty centers, cafes, kiosks, ability to collect milk from smallholder farmers so that it reaches the processors on time. All of these are imminent areas of job creation that we're not taking advantage of just because we're all sitting waiting for this massive grid to reach us. Now, we have nothing against the grid. The grid is an important and very crucial part of the access to energy challenge, but it is taking time and it's taking billions of dollars. We can create jobs right here, right now by using off-grid technologies. Off-grid productive use technologies are available in simple to assemble and transport, and relatively affordable at the moment. So this is the fantastic potential that we see, and yet, as you heard earlier, only 2,300 units have been of appliances have been imported into a country of 110 million people. It's a drop in the ocean. The kind of jobs where we would be able to create by using simple, renewable solutions to distribute across the vastness of our population. This is an area that we have not given enough attention to and that we must give attention to. The challenges are well known. I will not repeat most of them, but eventually what it comes down to is making the products available to our population. And this has implications of cost, of course, and has implications of financing, both in local currency and in foreign currency. I've heard some of my colleagues make points about this. One thing I want to emphasize heavily enough is the potential for assembling and manufacturing in Ethiopia. And this is an area we are actively pursuing in partnership with our partners. Even though foreign currency continues to be a challenge, even when we're assembling and manufacturing, our analysis at the high level shows that using just local labor and some available technological capabilities on the ground, we can save up to 25%, at least in solar home systems and lanterns, we can save up to 25% foreign currency. It means we can have 25% more units available in the country for the same amount of money. This is a critical insight that has to be taken advantage of. And we need to create the environment where manufacturing and assembly is a no-brainer in Ethiopia. The units that are being imported right now, the units that are imported using development finance money and government of Ethiopia finance money have to be geared towards supporting the import of parts, not so much finished products. Now, we can't do this overnight, we understand that, but we have to make it a no-brainer so our entrepreneurs outside are able to import and assemble the parts here and do as much substitution as possible. And the finance sphere is very clear. Our government has moved on from just focusing on financing state-owned enterprises. It has started financing the private sector. We say more work needs to be done in making sure the kind of financing that empowers the vastness of the Ethiopian population, not just those well-connected individuals and entrepreneurs living in the urban centers, investing in real estate and allied operations, but the kinds of investments, a kind of financing that creates jobs down at the rural level, that changes the lives of the average Ethiopian out there. These areas need to be taken care of. And at the macro level, the Ministry of Finance, the National Bank of Ethiopia, MOE, and other stakeholders need to make sure that the overall environment supports this. And we all need to work together. We all need to work together to make sure that innovative financing schemes like asset-based financing and all sorts of other areas that we are already currently studying need to be finalized and put on the table. That's all I want to say for now. We have a fantastic opportunity here to empower our rural population to create jobs. We are deeply grateful for our partnership with the Jobs Creation Commission, FCDO, ACE, and then of course, OCA, who co-wrote this report with our team here. Really deeply appreciated, and thank you all for listening to us today. Thank you.